I gave everything for my family, but they had the heart to forge my signature while I was fighting between life and death in the ICU. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Naomi Carter. I'm 39 years old, and for the last 15 years, I've built a financial consulting firm that helps businesses survive bad decisions before those decisions become disasters. People like to joke that I can spot financial trouble from a mile away. Most days, they're right. I can look at a balance sheet for 5 minutes and tell you where the money disappeared. I can walk into a struggling company and usually find the leak before lunch. What I couldn't see was what had been happening inside my own family. Back then, though, I thought I was one of the lucky ones. My mornings always started the same way: coffee, a quick workout if I had time. Then I checked overnight emails before driving to the office while returning calls from clients on my hands-free headset. By 8:30, my calendar was already packed. Naomi, the Henderson meeting got moved to 10. Perfect. That gives me time to review their projections. And don't forget your flight this afternoon. I won't. That week, I was flying to Chicago to speak at a national business conference. It was one of the biggest events I'd ever been invited to, and I'd spent weeks preparing my presentation. My assistant, Claire, was more excited than I was. "They're going to love you," she said as she handed me the final schedule. "I hope they stay awake," she laughed. "They paid to hear you speak. I think you'll be fine." I smiled, but my phone buzzed before I could answer. "Mom." I glanced at the screen and answered immediately. "Hi, Mom." There wasn't even a greeting. "Naomi, did you send the transfer? The one for Ryan?" "Yes, the contractor is waiting. I scheduled it yesterday. It should already be there." "Oh, good. That was it. No, how are you? No safe flight? No good luck with your speech. Just confirmation that the money had arrived." She thanked me quickly before hanging up. I stared at the phone for a second. Claire looked over from her desk. "Everything okay?" "Yeah." "You don't sound convinced." "It's nothing." And honestly, it wasn't unusual. My parents called when they needed something. Ryan needed inventory. Ryan needed equipment. Ryan needed help negotiating a loan. Ryan needed another few months before paying someone back. Ryan always seemed to need something. He was my younger brother, and he'd recently opened his own restaurant. Restaurants are risky businesses. I knew that better than anyone. Margins were thin. Unexpected expenses showed up constantly. If I could help him stay afloat, why wouldn't I? People sometimes asked why I kept saying yes. The answer was simple. When my brother and I were kids, my parents worked harder than anyone I knew. Dad picked up overtime every chance he got. Mom worked double shifts and still somehow managed to make every birthday feel special. We never had much money, but we always had dinner together. They sacrificed so Ryan and I could have opportunities they never did. Helping them later in life never felt like an obligation. It felt like gratitude. If I had more than they did, sharing it seemed natural. By noon, I had finished my meetings, packed my laptop, and headed for the airport. Claire walked me to the elevator. "Call us after your keynote." "I will. And please try not to answer work emails for at least one evening." "I'll do my best." She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me. She was probably right. Traffic moved surprisingly well, and I arrived at the airport with enough time to grab a coffee before boarding. As I found a seat near my gate, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Ryan. He'd sent a picture of the front of his restaurant. The new outdoor sign had finally been installed. The patio was full. People were smiling with drinks in their hands. Under the photo, he wrote only one sentence. "Couldn't have done it without family." I smiled to myself and typed back a simple thumbs up before slipping my phone into my bag as boarding was announced. The conference center was already buzzing by the time I arrived. People in tailored suits filled every hallway, balancing coffee cups and business cards while talking about investments, mergers, and market forecasts. It felt familiar. This was my world. As soon as I checked in, someone called my name. "Naomi Carter?" I turned and saw Michael Benson, an old colleague I hadn't seen in almost 4 years. "Look at you," he laughed as we shook hands. "I keep seeing your firm mentioned everywhere." "I've been keeping busy." "Busy? You built one of the most respected consulting firms in the region." I smiled. It didn't happen overnight. It never does. A few more familiar faces joined us, and before long, we were catching up like no time had passed. One woman nudged my shoulder. You always were the one who worked harder than everyone else. I just never learned how to slow down. You still haven't. She wasn't wrong. Even while everyone chatted over lunch, my phone kept vibrating across the table. Claire. I stepped into a quieter hallway before answering. Everything okay? For the most part, she replied. A client sent revised financial statements. They need your approval when you're back. I'll review them tonight. I knew you'd say that. Another pause. And your parents called the office. My parents. They couldn't reach you. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Mom, 1 from Dad. I frowned. They didn't leave a message? No, they only asked when you'd be available. I'll call them after my presentation. Sounds good? Good luck out there. Thanks. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. For a moment, I wondered what they wanted. Then I shrugged it off. If it was urgent, they would have texted. When my session finally started, the room was almost full. Seeing hundreds of faces looking back at me would have terrified me years earlier. Now, it simply felt like another conversation. I spoke about financial discipline, leadership during uncertainty, and the importance of protecting both businesses and the people behind them. The audience laughed at the right moments. They nodded. They took notes. When I finished, the applause lasted longer than I expected. Several people lined up afterward to ask questions. One young entrepreneur smiled nervously. I started my company 2 years ago, he said. Your talk made me rethink how I'm managing everything. I'm glad. Thank you for being honest about mistakes instead of pretending success is easy. I shook his hand. It never is. Moments like that made every long night worth it. By the time the last conversation ended, my voice was starting to fade. I finally found an empty chair near the back of the conference hall and closed my eyes for a second. Just a second. My phone rang again. Claire. Sorry, she said. One more thing. I laughed quietly. I had a feeling. The accounting documents can wait until tomorrow. I thought they were urgent. They are, but you sound exhausted. I'll survive. Promise me you'll at least eat dinner. I promise. As I ended the call, a sharp pain shot through the side of my head. I winced. That wasn't normal. I rubbed my temple and took a slow breath. Maybe too much coffee. Maybe not enough sleep. I'd been pushing myself for weeks. I stood up, hoping a short walk would help. Instead, the hallway tilted. I grabbed the edge of a nearby table before I lost my balance. Someone looked at me. Ma'am, are you okay? I'm fine, I answered automatically. But the words barely came out. The pounding inside my head grew worse. Voices around me sounded distant, almost underwater. Another person hurried over. She's really pale. Should we call someone? I tried to answer. The floor suddenly disappeared beneath me. Fragments, bright lights, people speaking over each other, blood pressures dropping. Get the neurologist? We're losing time. I couldn't tell whether my eyes were open or closed. Everything drifted in and out. The next clear voice belonged to a doctor. We're taking her to the ICU immediately. Prepare for emergency treatment. Cold air brushed across my face as my bed rolled down a hallway. For a brief moment, I forced my eyes open. Someone noticed. Naomi, can you hear me? I couldn't answer. My lips wouldn't cooperate. Instead, I lifted my hand just enough to make one small gesture. I wasn't reaching for the doctor. I wasn't reaching for the nurse. I was searching for my phone. I kept staring at my phone, convinced it would light up any second. Nothing. I called Mom first, straight to voicemail. Then Dad. No answer. I waited a few minutes and tried again, telling myself they were probably driving or in a place with bad reception. Still nothing. The heart monitor beside my bed kept its steady rhythm while every unanswered call made my chest feel heavier than the last. A nurse noticed me reaching for the phone again. Do you want me to help? She asked gently. I nodded. My parents, they should know I'm here. She took my phone and looked through the emergency contacts I'd saved years ago. Mom was listed first, Dad was second. She called both numbers. No answer. She even left a short voicemail. This is St. Matthew's Hospital. We're calling regarding Naomi Carter. Please contact us as soon as possible. She handed my phone back with an encouraging smile. I'm sure they'll call when they hear the message. I hope so. I wanted to believe her. I really did. Hours passed, one slow minute at a time. Doctors came in, nurses checked my medications. Ethan barely left my side except to grab coffee or answer work calls in the hallway. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped. Most of the time, it wasn't them. Insurance notifications, messages from coworkers, friends asking why I hadn't shown up for meetings, not my parents. Ethan watched me glance at the screen over and over. You don't have to keep checking. I know. You've already done everything you can? I didn't answer, because a part of me still believed my parents would rush through those hospital doors the second they found out. That's what parents do, right? Close to evening, my phone finally vibrated again. Dad! My hands actually shook while opening the message. For 1 second, I imagined it saying they were already on the way. Instead, I read, Ryan's restaurant opening is today. We'll come after things settle down. That was it. No, are you okay? No, what happened? Not even a question about whether I was alive. Just Ryan? His restaurant. His big day. I read it again because my brain refused to accept those were the only words. Ethan looked at my face. What did he say? I silently handed him the phone. His jaw tightened immediately. Seriously? I couldn't even answer. The strange thing wasn't that I felt angry. It was that I didn't. Not at first. For years, I had been the one making excuses. They're under stress. They didn't mean it that way. Ryan needs more help than I do. Those explanations came so automatically that I barely noticed them anymore. But this time, nothing came. There wasn't a single excuse left that sounded believable. I simply looked at the message until the screen went dark. Ethan reached over and squeezed my hand. You don't have to defend them. The words hung in the air. For the first time in my life, I didn't. If you've ever been the person who always made excuses for everyone else, let me know in the comments. Sometimes the hardest truth isn't what people do. It's realizing you've been explaining it away for years. The hallway outside the ICU grew quieter as visiting hours came to an end. A few minutes later, a man in a dark gray suit stopped outside my room. He wasn't carrying flowers. He wasn't family. He looked toward the nurse's station before asking, Is Ms. Naomi Carter awake? The nurse glanced at me. She is. Can I help you? The man adjusted the folder under his arm. I only need a few minutes. He stepped closer to my bed and lowered his voice. Ms. Carter, are you well enough to answer a few questions about a bank document? The man waited until the nurse gave a small nod before stepping inside. My name is Daniel Brooks, he said quietly. I'm with First Harbor Bank. Ethan immediately moved a little closer to my bed. What is this about? Daniel kept his voice calm. I'm sorry to bother Ms. Carter while she's recovering. Under normal circumstances, this conversation would happen at a branch office. But we've been notified of her medical emergency, and I need to verify the status of a loan guarantor. I frowned. A loan? What? The restaurant loan for Ryan Carter. For a second, I honestly thought he'd confused me with someone else. My brother's restaurant? Yes. I've never borrowed money for Ryan. You aren't listed as the borrower, Daniel replied. You're listed as the primary guarantor. The words didn't even make sense. I looked at Ethan. He looked just as confused as I felt. There has to be a mistake, I said. I've never agreed to guarantee anyone's business loan. Daniel didn't argue. I understand why this is surprising. He opened the folder in his hands, but kept it closed on his lap. That's exactly why I wanted to confirm your identity before discussing anything further. Ethan folded his arms. Can you explain what being a guarantor actually means? Daniel nodded. If the borrower defaults and the loan can't be repaid through the business or other pledged assets, the guarantor becomes legally responsible under the terms of the agreement. I felt my stomach tighten. How much is this loan? Daniel hesitated for a moment, almost as if he wished he didn't have to answer. $840,000, I stared at him. I'm sorry, how much? $840,000. Ryan had told everyone he only needed a few $100,000 to finish renovations and buy equipment. I remembered him joking at a family barbecue. It's not that expensive. Once we open, the place will pay for itself. Mom had smiled proudly. Dad kept talking about how this restaurant would become the family's legacy. Nobody had ever mentioned a number anywhere close to $840,000. I shook my head slowly. No, that's impossible. Daniel remained professional. I'm not here to discuss the loan itself. I only need to verify whether you still acknowledge your responsibilities as guarantor. I can't acknowledge something I never agreed to. The room went completely quiet. Even the steady beeping from the monitor suddenly felt louder. Daniel looked between Ethan and me before speaking carefully. If that's the case, I believe you should have copies of the documents. I want them, I said immediately. Every page. Without another word, he opened the folder. The paperwork was neatly organized with colored tabs separating each section. He handed the stack to me. My hands were still weak, so Ethan helped support the pages while I looked through them. Loan amount, business information. Ryan's name, collateral details. Everything looked official. Then I reached the signature pages. I froze. There it was. My name, Naomi Carter. And underneath it, a signature that looked exactly like mine. I didn't have to guess. I recognized every curve of the letters, every habit I'd developed over years of signing contracts. I kept staring at it, unable to speak. Ethan leaned closer. Naomi? I barely heard him, because the signature on that page looked exactly like the one I'd written thousands of times before. I couldn't stop looking at the signature. It looked like mine, but I couldn't remember signing anything connected to Ryan's restaurant. Daniel left copies of the documents with us before quietly excusing himself. He understood I needed time. The second he walked out, Ethan looked at me. Who do you trust? My attorney. Call them. I didn't hesitate. My hands were still weak, so Ethan dialed the number and put the call on speaker. My attorney, Melissa Grant, answered almost immediately. Naomi? Ethan said you're in the hospital. Are you okay? I've been better. I took a slow breath. I need you to look into something, right now. An hour later, Melissa joined us with her laptop and a box of files she'd kept from handling my financial matters over the years. She listened without interrupting while I explained everything. When I finished, she didn't rush to give an opinion. Instead, she asked one simple question. Do you remember ever signing documents for Ryan? I remember signing things for my parents. What kind of things? I frowned. Tax forms, maybe? A few authorization papers? Mom always said they were routine family paperwork. Melissa opened her laptop. Let's verify that. She logged into my secure document archive while Ethan helped me unlock old email accounts I hadn't checked in years. For a while, the room was filled with nothing but keyboard clicks. Every few minutes, Melissa would ask another question. Did your father ever email documents instead of mailing them? Yes. Did they ever ask you to sign quickly because of a deadline? I gave a slow nod. More than once. As we searched through years of emails, memories started coming back. Dad calling during work. I only need your signature. It'll take 30 seconds. Mom smiling while sliding a folder across the kitchen table. Don't worry about reading all of it. It's just administrative stuff. Ryan laughing. You know, paperwork isn't my thing. You're the organized one. At the time, none of it had felt unusual. I worked in finance. People asked me to sign and review documents all the time. I trusted my family enough not to question every page they handed me. Melissa suddenly stopped typing. Naomi. Her voice had changed. She turned the laptop toward us. I found one of the original email chains. The attachment I had signed was still there. It was only 3 pages long. A simple authorization related to property records. Nothing about a loan. Nothing about being a guarantor. Melissa clicked another file. This version was downloaded several weeks later. The document was much longer. Additional pages had been inserted behind the page, containing my signature. My name appeared on the final guarantee section. The signature matched perfectly because it had been copied from the original signed page. I felt my mouth go dry. They changed it? Melissa didn't answer immediately. She compared timestamps, digital records, and file histories. The metadata shows the attachment was modified after the original document was signed. Ethan leaned closer. So someone reused her signature. It certainly appears that way. I looked down at my hands. Every memory I'd brushed aside over the years suddenly felt different. Every rushed phone call, every envelope waiting on the kitchen counter, every time Mom had said, "Just sign here, sweetheart." I had never questioned them. Not once. The realization hurt more than the documents themselves. It wasn't just the possibility of fraud. It was the possibility that the people I trusted most had counted on that trust. Melissa slowly closed the file and looked directly at me. There was no hesitation in her voice anymore. I think this goes beyond a misunderstanding. Emma walked into my room, carrying a paper bag with coffee for Ethan and a bouquet of flowers that looked far too cheerful for an ICU floor. The second she saw me sitting up in bed, she smiled. "You scared me." "I scared myself." She leaned over carefully and hugged me without touching the IV lines. "I've been calling you for 2 days." "I know. Things got complicated." Ethan quietly took the coffee and stepped into the hallway, giving us some privacy. Emma pulled up a chair. "You look exhausted." "I feel worse than I look." She gave me a small smile. "I doubt that's possible." For the first time since everything started, I actually laughed. It only lasted a second, but it felt good. Then I handed her the copied loan documents. Her smile disappeared. She read every page without saying a word. When she finally looked up, she asked softly, "Did they really do this?" "I don't know anymore." I rubbed my forehead. "I thought I knew my family." The words hung between us, maybe because they were the first honest thing I'd said about them in a long time. Emma didn't interrupt. She just waited. So I started talking, not about the loan, about everything. How I'd been paying my parents' bills for years whenever they fell behind. How Ryan always had another emergency. How every birthday somehow became about helping someone else. How holidays usually ended with me writing another check. I kept telling myself it was temporary, I said. Then 1 year turned into 5. And 5 became 15. Emma looked down at her hands. "I remember." "You do?" She nodded. "You canceled vacations because Ryan needed money. You postponed remodeling your own house because your parents said the roof was leaking. You even skipped celebrating your promotion because your dad's truck broke down." I blinked. I'd forgotten half those moments. She hadn't. "You know what the strange part is?" I asked. "I was never angry while I was doing it. Because you loved them. I thought that's what family was." Emma was quiet for a moment, then she took a careful breath. "Can I tell you something without you getting upset?" I nodded. "I've been worried about your relationship with them for years." That surprised me. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I almost did, more than once." She gave an awkward little shrug. "But every time I hinted that they were asking too much, you defended them." I didn't argue, because she was right. "You always had a reason." "They're struggling." "Ryan's trying." "It's only this once." Emma smiled sadly. "I stopped bringing it up because I didn't want you to think I was attacking your family." Hearing someone else repeat my own excuses was uncomfortable. Not because they sounded cruel, because they sounded familiar. Too familiar. I realized I'd been protecting the image of my family almost as much as I'd been supporting them financially. Even when no one asked me to. Even when the evidence kept piling up. Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. "You've spent years rescuing everyone else. When was the last time someone rescued you?" I searched for an answer. Nothing came. Not one example. If this story reminds you of someone who's always carrying everyone else's problems, leave a comment. Sometimes, hearing another perspective is what helps us notice patterns we've been living with for years. A nurse stepped in to check my medication, breaking the silence for a few minutes. As she left, I looked back at Emma. "There is something you can do for me." "Anything." "My office." She immediately nodded. "What do you need?" "There are locked filing cabinets in my office, top drawer on the left side. The key is taped underneath my desk." Emma pulled out her phone and opened a notes app. "What am I looking for?" "Client archives, old contracts, and a blue accordion folder labeled personal." She looked at me carefully. "You think there's something in there?" I met her eyes. "I don't know. But I think it's time we stop assuming and start checking." Melissa returned that afternoon, but this time she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was David Chen, the financial advisor who had worked with my consulting firm for almost 8 years. He gave me a sympathetic smile. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. So do I. The three of us spread copies of the documents across the small hospital table. For the next hour, nobody rushed me. That alone felt strange. My family had always made everything sound urgent. Sign this today. We need an answer right now. Don't overthink it. Melissa and David were the opposite. Every option came with an explanation. Every decision came with a warning. Every signature came only after they were sure I understood what it meant. David pointed to the loan agreement. The biggest issue isn't just whether the guarantee is valid. It's what happens while that question is being investigated. I looked at him. What do you mean? If Ryan keeps making payments, there's time. But if the restaurant misses payments or defaults, he paused carefully. The bank could pursue the guarantor listed in the agreement while the legal dispute is unfolding. I already knew the answer before asking. Which would be me? Melissa nodded. If we don't act quickly, you could be forced to defend yourself while also facing collection efforts. I slowly leaned back against the pillows. So even if I never agreed to this, you still need to protect yourself immediately. The room fell quiet. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about how disappointed my parents might be. I was thinking about what would happen if I did nothing. David opened another folder. There are several practical steps we can take today. Nothing dramatic. No lawsuits today? Melissa smiled faintly. Not today. We start with the basics. That sounded manageable. She handed me a checklist. We revoke any financial authorizations that allow family members to access your accounts. I nodded. Done. We stop every automatic transfer that's still going to your parents or Ryan. I hesitated, not because I wanted to keep paying, because I suddenly realized I couldn't remember how many automatic payments still existed. Utilities, insurance, a storage unit, Ryan's business software subscription, even a monthly payment on one of my parents' credit cards. One by one, David helped me identify them. One by one, I authorized each cancellation. Every signature felt surprisingly calm. Not angry, not dramatic, just necessary. Melissa looked at me. How are you feeling? I glanced at the growing stack of completed paperwork. Lighter. Then I laughed quietly. I never thought canceling automatic payments would feel like progress. It is progress, David said. You're creating space to figure out the truth before making any larger decisions. For years, I'd trusted my family simply because they were family. Now I found myself trusting the people who asked for proof instead of promises. That realization hurt, but it also made me feel safer than I had in days. Melissa slid the final document toward me. This one notifies the bank that your legal counsel is representing you regarding the guarantee. I read every page, every paragraph, every line. Nobody rushed me. When I finished, I signed my name. This time, I watched the ink dry. Melissa gathered the paperwork into a neat stack. That's everything for today. Almost at the exact same moment, my phone began to ring on the bedside table. The screen lit up. Dad calling. I stared at my phone while it kept ringing. Just a day earlier, I would have answered before the first ring ended. Now, I let it ring twice, 3 times. Ethan looked at me but didn't say anything. The choice was mine. I finally swiped to answer. Hello? For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. Then Dad cleared his throat. Naomi, how are you feeling? His voice sounded tired, almost nervous. I've been better. I'm sorry we couldn't get there sooner. Before I could respond, Mom's voice came through in the background. Put me on speaker. A second later, she was talking. Oh, sweetheart, we heard the surgery went well. We were so relieved. I waited. Part of me wanted to hear the words I'd been hoping for ever since I woke up. We're coming. We should have been there. We're so sorry. Instead, Mom continued. The hospital didn't call again after the operation, so we assumed everything was okay. I frowned. They left voicemail messages. I know, honey, but after that, we figured no news was good news. Her explanation landed with far less impact than it would have a week ago. I simply listened. Dad spoke again. We wanted to come earlier. It was Ryan's grand opening. I know. It couldn't really be postponed. I know. There was another silence, not the comfortable kind, the kind where everyone realizes something has changed, but nobody knows how to name it. Mom tried again. How long will you have to stay in the hospital? A few more days. Oh, she sounded distracted for just a second. Then she asked, did anyone from the bank stop by? I looked at Ethan. His expression didn't change. Yes. Another pause. Dad answered too quickly. They're probably just updating paperwork. I don't think that's all they were doing. Mom laughed nervously. You know how banks are? Everything becomes complicated. I didn't rescue the conversation. I didn't offer explanations for them. I didn't pretend I believed that was the whole story. Dad lowered his voice. They mentioned the loan? Yes. What exactly did they say? There it was. The conversation had finally reached what seemed to matter most. Not my surgery, not the ICU, not whether I was recovering. The loan, the guarantee, Ryan's restaurant. I kept my answer short. They gave me copies of the documents. Neither of them spoke. I could almost hear them looking at each other. Mom broke the silence. I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. Maybe. You know your father would never intentionally involve you in something harmful. I heard what you said. She seemed surprised that I didn't immediately agree. For years, this was usually the point where I'd reassure everyone. I'd tell them not to worry. I'd say we'd figure it out together. This time, I didn't. Dad tried a different approach. Ryan's opening has been stressful for everyone. I'm sure it has. He hasn't even had time to enjoy it because of all this confusion. I closed my eyes for a second. I realized they still hadn't asked one simple question. How are you really doing? Not once. If you've ever noticed someone changing the subject from your pain to their own problems, you probably know how quiet that realization feels. It doesn't always happen with an argument. Sometimes it happens in a conversation just like this. Mom spoke more softly. We'll come see you. When? As soon as we finish a few things at the restaurant. I glanced at Melissa, who was quietly organizing the legal files across the room. Then I looked back at Ethan. He gave the smallest nod. I took a slow breath. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to convince my parents that everything was okay. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. I didn't defend anyone. I simply said, we'll talk when you get here. Then I ended the call. The door opened just before noon. Mom walked in first, carrying a small gift bag and wearing the same smile she used whenever she wanted to pretend everything was normal. Dad followed behind her. Ryan came in last, holding a balloon that looked completely out of place in an ICU recovery room. There she is, Ryan said with a grin. You really know how to scare people. Normally, I would have smiled back, maybe even teased him about the balloon. This time, I just nodded. Hi, Ryan. His smile faded a little. Mom stepped closer to my bed and gently touched my arm. You look better than I expected. I'm recovering. We've been worried. I looked at her for a second. I know. The room settled into an awkward silence. Dad cleared his throat. The restaurant opening went well. Ryan laughed lightly. You should have seen the crowd. We almost ran out of food. Nobody answered. He shifted his weight and looked around the room. I guess. Wrong story for today. Ethan stood quietly near the window. He wasn't interrupting. He was simply watching. Ryan pulled a chair closer. I really am glad you're okay. I appreciate that. Those words were true, but they didn't erase everything else. Mom finally sat down. We all need to calm down and talk through this. I agree. Dad looked relieved. I knew you'd understand. I didn't say that. His expression changed immediately. I reached toward the folder beside my bed and pulled out the copies of the loan documents. I spoke with someone from the bank. Ryan blinked. You did? Yes. Dad answered before Ryan could. They're making this much more complicated than it needs to be. I looked directly at him. They told me I'm the primary guarantor. Nobody spoke. Ryan slowly turned toward our parents. I thought Naomi already knew. Mom frowned. Of course she knew. Ryan looked confused. You told me everything had been approved. Mom hesitated. It had? No, Ryan said, shaking his head. You said Naomi had signed everything. I signed documents, I replied quietly. I never agreed to guarantee an $840,000 loan? Ryan stared at me. You really didn't know? I met his eyes. No. The confidence disappeared from his face. He looked back at Dad. Dad? Dad folded his arms. It wasn't exactly like that. Then how was it? Nobody raised their voice. Nobody slammed a door. But the air in the room felt heavier with every sentence. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. I swear, Naomi, I thought you had all the details. I wouldn't have opened the restaurant if I believed you were being tricked. For the first time since this started, I believed he meant that. He looked genuinely shaken. Mom tried to step in again. This isn't helping anyone. No, I said calmly. But pretending nothing happened won't help either. Dad let out a slow breath. We're family. We can fix this ourselves. I shook my head. I've spent years trying to fix everything myself. Nobody argued with that, not even Ryan. If you're still watching, let me know what you think at this point. Do you believe Ryan was kept in the dark too, or should he have asked more questions before accepting such a huge loan? A soft knock interrupted the silence. The door opened. Melissa walked into the room carrying a thick folder. She looked from me to my parents, then to Ryan. Without saying a word, she placed the signed file on the table beside my bed. This is ready, she said quietly. Every eye in the room shifted to the folder. Melissa rested the folder on the table and looked around the room before speaking. I'll keep this brief. Nobody interrupted her. Ms. Carter has formally revoked every financial authorization that could expose her to additional personal liability. We've notified the bank that the validity of the guarantor documents is being challenged, and from this point forward, all communication regarding the loan will go through my office. Dad looked at me. So, you're taking legal action against your own family? Melissa answered before I could. She's protecting her legal rights. Those are not the same thing. The room went quiet again. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We never wanted this. I believed she meant that, but I also believed something else. Intentions didn't erase consequences. I took a slow breath. I'm not here to punish anyone. Dad opened his mouth, but I gently shook my head. Please, let me finish. He leaned back. For once, he listened. I spent years believing that helping was the same thing as loving. I paid bills. I covered emergencies. I signed papers because I trusted you. I told myself that's what family does. Nobody looked at me. Ryan stared at the floor. Mom wiped at her eyes. I don't know exactly who knew what, I continued. Maybe some of you knew more than others. Maybe some of you assumed I understood everything. I looked at Ryan. I believe you when you say you thought I already knew. He swallowed hard and nodded. I did. I really did. Then I turned back to my parents. But whether this happened because of dishonesty or because everyone stopped asking questions, I can't keep living like this. Mom whispered, what does that mean? It means I'm done being the family's financial safety net. No anger, no shouting, just a sentence I'd probably needed to say years ago. If someone needs help, we'll have a conversation. But I won't sign anything I haven't reviewed. I won't send money because I'm expected to. And I won't guarantee debts that aren't mine. Dad looked older than he had when he walked into the room. I don't know how we got here, I answered honestly. I think we got here one small decision at a time. Nobody had anything to say after that. Ryan stood first. He walked over to my bed. I'm sorry. I should have asked more questions. I gave him a small nod. I wish you had. He squeezed my shoulder before leaving the room. My parents followed a minute later. Mom paused at the door. I hope you'll still answer when I call. I will, but some conversations are going to be different from now on. She nodded quietly. I understand. Whether she truly did or not, I couldn't tell. A few months later, I was back at work. Not at the pace I'd kept before. A healthier one. I stopped staying late just because everyone else expected me to. I took weekends off. I actually used the vacation days I'd been saving for years. Emma claimed she liked this version of me better. Ethan said I laughed more. Melissa continued handling everything related to the disputed loan. It wasn't resolved overnight, and I learned that some problems move through lawyers and paperwork much more slowly than emotions do. Things with my family stayed complicated. We talked, sometimes, We met for birthdays, occasionally for dinner. There were awkward pauses that hadn't existed before. There were boundaries that definitely hadn't existed before. Oddly enough, those boundaries made every honest conversation possible. One Monday morning, just before a meeting with my team, my phone buzzed. It was Ryan. His message was short. I've been thinking a lot these past few months. I got used to believing you'd always fix things. I never asked what that was costing you. I'm sorry. I read it twice. Then I locked my phone and set it on the conference table. My coworkers were already discussing budgets and upcoming projects. Someone asked for my opinion. I smiled. Let's get started. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel the need to drop everything and rescue someone else. My family story wasn't completely finished. Maybe it never will be. But my own life had finally started moving in a direction that I chose. If you've ever had to set boundaries with people you love, I'd genuinely like to hear your experience. Was it difficult at first? And did it change your relationship over time?